Again, it's good to be with you tonight. The beatitude I want us to look at is Matthew 5:6. Blessed are those who mourn, or blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they will be filled. Recently, a minister whom I know sent an email to several of us telling us about Generation Z Bible. Frankly, I had never heard of it, but I was fascinated that there was a Gen Z Bible, the Gen Z generation from 1997 to 2012. So I Googled part of it and listened to part of it. And then I went back and looked at this 6th verse in the 5th chapter of Mark and the way it was translated in the Gen Z Bible. Now, I have to tell you, after listening to some of this new Bible and knowing my own self, I'm going back to the New Revised Standard Version. There are some good things that are in there, but it really is a transliteration. It's not a translation. So I looked at it and I asked myself, well, how is the 6th verse translated in this Gen Z Bible? Happy are those who crave justice and righteousness, for they will be fulfilled. That's interesting, I thought to myself, because there is a word added, and that is the word justice. Why would justice be added to righteousness? You can make a case that they are really synonyms and mean much the same thing. But you can also make a case that there is some difference between justice and righteousness. Think about this Gen Z generation and how they have grown up. 1997, 4 years later, 2001, September 11th. None of us will ever forget that day. The Gen Z generation has grown up in a world of violence, of real violence, especially in their schools. Mothers and fathers worry about their children. I never remember being concerned about going to school when I was a child. But how many shootings have we had in schools? People have had to live through events like the Sandy Hook shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, where 20 students and 6 teachers were killed. I happened to be taping this the day after a assassin who was on the golf course where Donald Trump was playing golf was caught. And again, it's a reminder. He didn't have just a gun. He had AR gun, automatic rifle. A man who had been arrested, a felon who never should have a gun. And you and I ask ourselves the question, why in the world does somebody like that have a gun? The Gen Xers, the Gen Zers, have grown up in a world of so much violence. And it's interesting how they've reacted. One of the things that they have done is that probably the demographic that least goes to church is the Gen Z generation. Now, we might ask ourselves the question, why don't they go to church? They have grown up in a world where there is so much violence, and sometimes I wonder if they go to church and they ever hear a minister talk about sensible gun control. I'm not talking about taking sides politically. I'm talking about sensible gun control. These people, these young people, have looked to the government for help. Won't you pass some kind of legislation that will help us? And nothing has been done to take these automatic military-style weapons off the street. And then they come to church. And in many churches, they hear nothing about doing anything to eradicate these guns. The Gen Zers have been raised in an age of pluralism. And for many of us who grew up well before they did, some of that is difficult to accept or difficult to understand. I know I'm probably speaking to some people right now, as well as to myself, to talk about how across the years I've come to some different conclusions about some things. But these young people are open to pluralism, to different expressions of things. Whom a person loves is not as much a concern to many in this generation as it is for many of us who are in different generations. I've had to come to grips with that and make some changes in my own opinion because I didn't grow up in that kind of world. Pluralism. Our nation is not becoming more white. It's not becoming more male. It is becoming dominated by different ethnic groups and a variety of religions. And do you know what has happened is that you and I, who have grown up in what I call a binary kind of atmosphere, and that is things were either or, they're growing up in a more complex environment where things are not always either or, and things are more confusing, more complex. As Brian McLaren says, not only more complex, but also more perplexing to these people. So they're not beating down the doors to get to church. We have a name for them called nuns. Richard Rohr, who is a great mystic of our time, I really like his more academic expression of nuns. He calls them non-participatory people. So whether you call them nuns or non-participatory, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that they'd have no spirituality, because many of them do have spirituality. It's just that they have been disappointed in the church. They've looked to the church to express not only righteousness, being right with God and right with each other, but on issues of justice. Why should a 58-year-old man be on a golf course where the former president is playing golf, and regardless of your political views, let's all agree, we don't want violence. We don't want people to be hurt. And I keep waiting, don't you, for somebody to rise up and say, let's put an end to this nonsense. We're not talking about taking away guns. We're talking about sensible gun control. I titled this devotion, What Matters Most. And what I want to end with, I believe ties all this together, and it is what matters most. Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? Love God with all of your heart and mind and soul. And love your neighbor, even your enemies. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, love your neighbor as you love yourself. If we can do that, we may begin to understand the power of this beatitude.
Wasting away, chasing the things that don't matter, spending my time trying to second guess what is so clear, starving to death, I keep eating food with no substance, dying of thirst, not knowing the river's so near. All who are thirsty, come to the water. All with no money can come by and eat. Why spend your money on food that is ruined? Why work for things that will not satisfy? Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, they are blessed, for they will be filled. They will be filled. Do we hunger for truth? Do we thirst for the good? We must turn from our wicked ways and accept God's mercy, His love and mercy and grace. So all who are thirsty, come to the water. All with no money can come by and eat. Why spend your money on food that is ruined? Why work for things that will not satisfy? All who are thirsty, come to the water. All with no money can come by and eat. Why spend your money on food that is ruined? Why work for things that will not satisfy? Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, they are blessed, they will be filled. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, they are blessed, they will be filled. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, they are blessed, they failed